first debate entitled I-Level Graduates Must Enter Academia. The chair for this moderator is Professor João Pinto Ferreira from Faculdade de Engenharia da Universidade do Porto. Enjoy the debate.
Okay, so good morning everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah? I will take it. Okay. So first of all, let me start by thanking the organization for having me here. It's a pleasure and an honor. It's also an honor to be among such distinguished speakers, and I also, on behalf of the organization, would like to thank their participation in this discussion. So we'll go through each of them. I'll ask each of the speakers to introduce themselves. We also have an agenda, and the agenda is to talk about how is the decision for the PhD to work in academia and industry, how can we improve the performance of PhDs in both academia and industry, well, where can they best find their happiness. And I must say that preparing to this session, I was looking in the web in Google, I was Googling why taking a PhD. And one of the things that's popped up was why you shouldn't take a PhD. And they had a huge list of why you shouldn't take a PhD. And in the end, they have one reason why you should take a PhD. And by reading that sentence was about something like, well, you may end having the tenure in the university that you don't like. And, well, you read all that and you really, get not that enthusiastic. But I think you should. In any case, so I will ask Miss Elisa to start by introducing yourself, please, and thank you for being here.
Okay, so I was the previous person introduced myself, but let me just to positioning why I am going to answer and why the reasons, okay, to answer this question. One of my responsibilities is I am the leader of the technical community in my region, so I take care of the level and the eminence of the technical teams, okay? So that's one of my responsibilities, to be sure that we have the best people and that we have the more brilliant and the more eminent people in the industry in front of our clients, okay? And based on this responsibility, I started 2 years ago, I think, with the idea that we need to start to thinking about how we can introduce PhDs in our communities. Because if you remember the video that I started my previous presentation, there are something that is relevant in the sentence of the video. One is think, and the other one is systematically, okay? And also if you're thinking about what is the TSA profile, one of the disciplines when we talk about the profile is the vertical, the deep knowledge in something, okay? So if you put these three elements together, really what you are looking for is for a PhD person. A person that really has knowledge about something, a person that is able to think, and a person that is able to do it in a systematically way to resolve problems. Because when we talk about information technology, don't forget it, we spend all the day resolving problems, okay? We are presenting solutions, we have traveling issues, but we are resolving problems. So, starting 2 years ago, we start to talk with the universities about two things. One thing is how we can use PhD people from the academia in a collaborative way in projects with us, and the other is how I can create from our professionals, people that currently is working in the company, how I can motivate them to move forward, move through the PhD programs in the university. Because I need to achieve this. I need to have people able to think, people able to think systematically, and also But there are something that I think we need to improve together between the academia and between the companies, and is how these people is able to communicate. Because it's not only about to do the things, it's also about to communicate what you are doing, okay? So this is the fourth parameter that I am looking for. So I am looking for people that is able to think systematically, okay? That has a deep knowledge in something, really deep knowledge, and this is able to communicate the knowledge. So if I put all of this together, we are talking about PhD people. And if you take a look of the complex solutions and the complex approach and the complex environment that we have, I think more and more we need to do the connection between the PhD academy, okay, with the PhDs in the industry, in the companies or in the industry, to be able to resolve this kind of problems.
Okay, thank you so much. Before going to the next speaker, I'd like you to raise your hands, people that are thinking about taking the PhD. Thinking about. Okay. Doing the PhD or already started PhD.
Okay, that's different.
Already started the research project for the PhD. Okay, there's someone in between that are still thinking about it. And PhD completed? Okay, so we have already a panorama of the audience. Thank you so much for your support. So, Professor Francisco Veloso, please.
Thank you very much. So I'll tell you a little bit about my perspectives on the PhD or not a PhD, and I'll talk about it partially based on my own experience, and for those that don't know me, I'll explain why some of my experience may be relevant for the issues that I'm going to bring about. And the other one is to think about the PhD and in general about education decisions that we make ex ante and ex post, because it's very, very different to think about that and the stage at which we are when we're thinking about the academic decisions that we're making. So let me explain you why I think this way. So the first message is flexibility. You will not have, you do not, whatever the stage of your career you are, you have no idea where your path is going to take you. You just don't have it. I mean, we all are at a certain stage thinking that life is going to take us in a particular direction, but life has this way of intruding with our plans and changing the path that we're going in very small and very large ways. And so the first thing that, and it's my most important advice, I think, for any of you at whatever stage of your career you are, is keep your options open and embrace flexibility. And why am I telling you these? Because I started my undergraduate as an applied physics and a physics engineer, right? So when I entered undergraduate, I thought my career was going to be in physics. I loved math, I loved physics, I was a good student, I liked engineering problems, and so I set out to think that that was going to be my career. And then about my third year, I was doing an internship in Germany in the Max Planck Institute for Nuclear Physics. And I found out, I mean, this was an emerging path, but it was kind of a defining moment for me, because I was working on a very interesting experiment looking at the orbits of particles that are basically working with the Galilei and the Cassini probes, and working with very interesting experiments that deal with basically the movements of small particles that tell us a lot about the orbits of the early stage of the solar system. So it was a very interesting project, you know, academically, for somebody in physics that would think that would be very interested on that. One would think that would be an ideal project to be in. But it turned out that I spent a lot of my time thinking about the organization of the R&D lab and how disorganized it was and how many things we should do differently to organize better the project, the processes. And so after a while, I realized that what I was really interested in was on the organization of R&D rather than doing the physics itself. And so I set out myself on that path, on basically first doing R&D project management, and then going and doing a PhD in the US at MIT, where many of you are connected to, in the engineering system, what then became the engineering systems division, in a program called technology management and policy, where people like us that are interested in this area of the organization of science and innovation policy and entrepreneurship policy can do graduate work and actually study to become a researcher. But then, and I did that, and when I finished my PhD, initially I wasn't even thinking that I was going to do a research career. I realized that if I wanted to manage R&D, that it was important to go through the PhD and to understand the R&D process and how do you really do research, right? What is this thing about research and why people talk about doing research as this very, different, unique set of skills, focus, path. But then, I learned about that and I discovered that I actually enjoyed it. And so even though I thought that after the PhD I was going to go back to do R&D project management, it turns out that I got a job offer from Carnegie Mellon, among other places, and I decided to go on a research career. And so I, for 10 years, was basically a researcher in the areas of innovation, and I went through the entire process of assistant professor, associate professor, tenure, full professor, the entire path. And I thought I'd set myself my career as a researcher in this area of innovation and entrepreneurship, and I was very happy with that. But then last year, I got progressively over time, because of my links to the management side, I've had progressive links with schools here in Portugal, with business and economic schools here in Portugal. And last year, I was invited to become the dean of a business school here in Lisbon, right? Católica Lisbon School of Business and Economics, that I'm the dean of at the moment. And so, in that regards, I didn't necessarily prepare myself. I didn't even plan that was necessarily the career path. But when the opportunity came about, I thought this is an interesting thing that I want to do. And so I took the offer. And I embraced this project about a year ago. So the first, and I'm doing these, I'm very happy with what I'm doing now, and what I've learned through my early stages in life is that there's some degree of planning involved, but there's also a lot of flexibility that it's worthwhile keeping. And that's, I think, the first most important message that I wanted to convey to you is that when options come about in your life as a researcher, look at them and see what they mean for you, and keep that flexibility because it can serve you well if it's really something that motivates. The second thing about the PhD is, and in general education decisions, that's very important, is this idea of the ex ante versus the ex post decisions that you make, right? If I look ex ante, now what I do now, if I would go all the way back, did it make any sense for me to study physics? Now that I became the dean of a business school, why didn't I go and study business or economics? Probably a more straightforward path. But in economics, we have a very important concept that we call sunk costs, right? So once you've done something in the past, it's sunk, meaning forget about it, it's done. There's no point about reminiscing too much. Always think about your decisions going into the future. And that's also very important in terms of your career decisions. And the reason why is, ex ante, if you're thinking about doing a PhD, what I can tell you is that, yes, the research skills, the skills that you learn in your PhD have a very important specific component that is really valuable if you're considering a research career. It doesn't have to be in academia. A research career in a firm or in a non-profit can be as fulfilling or sometimes even more fulfilling than a research career in academia. So this is nothing to do with being in academia or not, but you're going to invest a lot of your time learning a specific skill set related to research that's really valuable in this profession. And only a very small part of that is really transferable to what you need in terms of your skill set, so for example, as a manager. So if you do a cost-benefit analysis of the amount of time and the opportunity cost of your time and your salaries for you to complete the PhD to acquire that skill set, and if you do that ex ante, there's no calculations that you can make that's going to make you reach a conclusion that's worthwhile doing a PhD if you're not considering a research career. And so if you're before that decision, what I can tell you is, do it if you really want to consider a research career. It may turn out in the future, just like it happened to me in terms of my investment in physics, that you're going to decide that you're going to go in a different direction. And that's fine, right? But if you're thinking about it ex ante, I can give you all sorts of statistics that tell you that a PhD on average will get more money both on any given moment and throughout their lifetime compared to somebody that just has a master's, right? So if you're doing it For the money, forget it. It's not a good idea. It's a bad idea. But, and that's the last part that I will get to, and so in terms of just closing down these ideas, that if you think about it ex ante, consider a PhD career if you really want to think about doing research. And for all of us that have done a PhD or are doing a PhD and love research, it's an extremely fulfilling career. That if you really like to do that, you should embrace wholeheartedly, because it's a very fulfilling, this notion of really trying to understand a difficult, concrete, important problem. It's a really fulfilling thing that we do in life as researchers, as persons that do careers in science, and that's extremely fulfilling. And so if that's something that really motivates you, you should again embrace it wholeheartedly. But that's really the motivation part, because if you're doing it ex ante, then don't think about it so much, because that skill set is going to be valued. And the last point that I just wanted to make about that is that if you've done it and you go in a different career, there are important parts of your skill set that you can take advantage of and leverage, and realize that your training in certain analytical skills and certain types of ways of looking at your problem will give you a differentiation perspective from other people that are doing your job that don't have that same training. So once you've decided to go on a non-academic path, try to think about what can you bring from your research career that you provide you a leg up, and don't throw away your analytical skills, because it's very easy to think about that. Because what I can tell you from going from a researcher last year, full-time researcher with 6 PhD students and a lot of research activity going on, to being a manager, is that the type of work is totally different. As a researcher, you're really going deep, as you mentioned, trying to understand the problem. If you're managing a school like I do now, I deal with a lot of different small problems, and it's a very different exercise about the complexity of dealing with many different issues on a very compressed amount of time. But that doesn't mean that you can throw away that you should throw away your analytical way of looking at a problem, which is something that you invest and you develop a lot in your research career, because that's something that can certainly be differentiating. And the last and final point, very, very briefly, is about your motivating. So I've hired PhD students for 10 years. I've hired assistant professors for 4 or 5 years. I've hired staff now. And one thing I can tell you is that you look at a CV and you bring a person. And for example, when we're recruiting for assistant professors at Católica, I mean, we do the traditional process where we look at a bunch of CVs, and then we have flyouts for 4 or 5 people that come and give a seminar and talk to people. And one thing I can tell you is that it really makes a huge difference down at the line. I mean, there's all these things that you need to go through and validate, in the sense that you have to do good research, you have to show that you're doing good things. But there's one very important element, which is your motivation, your eagerness of doing something. And so what I can tell you about that, just to finalize, is that do something that you really want and that you really believe in, because that down the line, when somebody's making a decision about hiring you or not hiring you, when everything else is kind of roughly equal, that eagerness, that wanting to do something, whether it's research, whether it's managerial or anything else, will really count. And so in that sense, we go full loop and pursue your dreams, because they'll make a difference in this indirect way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have now, I hope, I think, a very different story from Marta. And so, can you please introduce also yourself?
Hello, everybody. When I was invited to come to this meeting, I was a bit puzzled. Why have these guys from MIT Portugal have invited me, a science communicator and manager in medicine, to come to their meeting? But now that I've heard Elisa and that I've heard Francisco, I understand why, because they said almost everything I was planning to say, so this is nice. And because usually I'm used to be a non-peer among peers. And today I'm feeling among peers. So only for that it was worth being here with all of you. So as they said, many things I would say. I'm going to focus on my personal experience to tell you just as an example of things that Francisco and Elisa have said. So I'm originally a biochemist, and my parents wanted me to do medicine because I was a very good student and medicine is the thing. And then I had to tell them, no, I'm going to do research in medicine, but I'm not going to be a medical doctor. So this was my first standing up by myself point, which I do not regret, because I went to do research. I did my PhD in cell and cancer biology. I loved doing biomedical research, and after 15 years of entering biochemistry, my parents were finally proud of their research daughter, because they went to my viva, my PhD defense, and they saw all the university, these formal things, people in black gowns, and me defending my ideas for 2 whole days, and for them it was very proud. And then after that, they were, yeah, my daughter is a researcher. And I told them, yeah, but now, you know, I'm quitting research. What? Yeah, I decided what I really want to do is be a science communicator. And this was like 7 years ago, and they are still fighting with these 2 words, science what? So this is to tell you, I think that Francisco has a similar story with much more, with a bigger track record, but flexibility is the thing, and you should go for what you really love to do, even if you think it's difficult. When I started doing science communication, because I decided I missed people, I missed putting people working together, collaborating, I missed the impact of the research. So my research was so fundamental that I thought I'm going to spend my whole life studying a mechanism. And I don't know, in the end, I will write a lot of papers, but I don't know if I want to be the person who wrote a lot of papers. I want to take medicine to the people without being a medical doctor. And so when I said this, I made a small training for science communication to see if I really wanted it. And the first person that taught me science communication, they asked me, why are you in this course? And I said, I'm considering a career in science communication. And they told me, forget about it. There are no jobs. Okay? And I was like, okay, but I'm going to try. So it's 7 years now. I don't know if there are jobs or not. I have been having work. So I'm really happy with that. So by this time, I was lucky enough to be invited to be a research manager in an institute to launch a PhD program. And meanwhile, the person who was in charge of the communication, she left. And suddenly there was this opportunity for me to develop both things. So I started doing communication and research. And then when I realized the direction was asking me to put up a proposal to build a unit specifically dedicated to communication, outreach, and management. So I did that with a group of colleagues, and I was running, and I was the director of this unit until last year, and everything was really well. I did projects in science communication, research projects in science communication, action projects, support to researchers, a wide variety of tasks. And then the policy of the institution changed, and then I had to consider, and I realized that maybe it was time to move on.